cooperation was also high on the agenda at the summit, at a time of global upheaval from Donald Trump's America First policies. Joining me now to discuss is Cornelia Meyer, Chairman and Chief Economist of LBV Asset Management. Cornelia, great to have you with us. Look, when we talk about economic cooperation by China, India, Russia, and frankly, the global south or BRICS nations as a whole, this is a conversation that's been happening for quite some time. Why does it hit differently now, given that the United States, I guess, has been ostracizing a lot of its allies with the threat of tariffs?
Look, it started to happen. Thank you for having me. It started to happen in 2001 when China started the then Shanghai Cooperation Organization with initially 6 countries. And that was when the US was at its total height of power. That was after the Soviet Union had collapsed and before we had the 9/11 attacks. And ever since then, more and more countries joined, or 4 more countries joined, but there are more observers. And there has just been more of a bonding together amongst the global south, because it's not always that easy for the countries of the global south to work with the global north because of the normative demands that the global north poses, and especially now not being as reliable as they have been. And the more sanctions you have, the more you scold nations, the more you drive them into the arms of China and the SCO.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening, and I guess everyone's sort of dissecting the relationship, particularly with the likes of Russia. Donald Trump is threatening 50% tariffs on India to punish it for buying Russian oil. India, of course, believes it's been treated unfairly and it's unfairly targeted. Give me a sense of what you think is ultimately happening here.
Well, India does feel, and I think rightfully thinks it's unfairly targeted. India imported 2% of its crude imports in 2022 before the war broke out from Russia. Now it's 38%. Why did they do that? They stay within the bounds of what's allowed in terms of what they pay for Indian oil, because we had this band of money that you can pay. But if they were today, refineries can't just switch their refineries from one supplier to the other supplier. It's to do with crude quality and so on. That would have huge inflationary impacts on the country. And let's not forget, India is a country that's still growing with a huge population, now the largest population in the world. So there's that much that India is willing to do because its economy is important to it.
Yeah. I want to talk about this multipolar world that's clearly emerging. And again, it's not only because of America First policies, but it's been simmering for quite some time. And one of the big issues has always been the reliance on the US dollar as a reserve currency. And emerging markets, by the way, have been talking about using their own currencies to settle payments for quite some time as well. Do you think the America First policy is catalyzing this conversation of creating a multipolar world, which has been playing out for quite some time, frankly, behind the scenes?
Well, I think it is helping that certainly along the way. When we come to replacing the dollar, that's not that easy because the dollar is at this point still, we never know what's happening in the US, still the only truly free currency that you can freely move. But the more you have sanctions and the more the US uses the dollar to impose its sanctions, the more people will find ways around it. And if I look at how oil is paid, a lot of oil to China is now from the Gulf is now paid in yuan, and even not to China is paid in other currencies. So the more the dollar is instrumentalized as an instrument of power and not just as an instrument of payment, the more it's undermining its own status.
So, Cornelia, let me ask you this, because I think this is quite important. China controls so much of the processing of a lot of the resources that we consume globally. A lot of the emerging markets in the global south hold the keys to resources and raw materials. Who's going to win this? And I guess President Trump is watching very closely at what's being said.
Yeah, President Trump is watching very closely, and this is precisely why China is in a stronger position when negotiating its trade deal with the US as India is. India just exports. Mind you, some of the exports like medicine and services, which the US needs, are exempt from the tariffs, but never mind. But if you look at it for China's, it's the processing, and you're right, it's the processing. It's not just having yours, it's the processing. A lot of, let's say, the lithium is mined somewhere in the Western Balkans, shipped to China, and then processed there. Then we find there. As long as this stronghold on the processing, on the refining of certain minerals exists in China, as long as that, China has a strong negotiating position towards whoever.
Yeah, really important here. Just very quickly, Cornelia, in terms of how the world is watching on and saying, okay, who are we going to pledge loyalty to in this multipolar world? Who do you think is going to come out stronger?
Well, I think
nations
will do what nations. I think nations will have to do what nations have to do, but I would just look at demographics. By 2050, we have 2 billion people more on this world, and they will be in Africa, they will be in Southern Asia. At this point, if I look at the membership of the SCO, the people who were there, not just the membership, it's more than half of the world's population. If I look at the membership alone, if I've added last night all the GDPs, it's together about as strong as the US. So the dynamics, the population dynamics, the dynamics will over time, not today, not tomorrow, but over the next 20 years, work for the Global South.
All right, Cornelia Meyer, great to have you with us. Thank you so much.